to the University of Hartford Art School's webinar for the Nomad 9 MFA, which is also the Interdisciplinary MFA. Before we start, we want to make sure you've muted your microphone. This is being recorded, and that's why we do that. If you look to your lower right, you'll see the chat option, and that's where you'll ask questions. We're going to collect the questions as we go along, and I'm going to keep my presentation brief so that we have plenty of time to answer questions at the end. And as we get started, I want to say, one of our first questions often when people are learning about this new MFA is, how are you organized? How does your structure work? And the main things to know about this MFA program are that we are an open outcome program, and what that means is that you can have a variety of art practices and have this be a really good program for you. We don't want a situation where it's just one type of artist, either as a student in the program or as faculty. We really value the diversity and the conversations that happen when a craftsperson is next to a social practice artist, is next to a muralist, is next to a sculptor, and so forth. We're also low residency, and how that translates for the students is that we get together for 3 weeks in the summer and 2 weeks in the fall and in the spring. And when you're not together on a residency, you're working via Skype with your thesis advisor 2 times during the year. Each fall of the 26-month program, we have an online class. So our students are just now finishing an online art history class. And this structure allows you to continue with your job and your home life and complete an accredited MFA program without having to move to a new city. So I've already mentioned this third bullet point. The fourth one is that we're different than many MFAs because in most MFAs, I would say, you're studying just art and art history. And we augment the studio art MFA with a cross-disciplinary approach so that you work with scientists, you might work with city planners, you might work with people from a municipal government, and all of this combines to be a dynamic program that allows you to learn a lot of practical skills that can assist you as an artist as you go forward. Another way I like to answer the question of what is this program all about is that we like to keep the teaching as creative and full of surprises and engaged and dynamic as art itself. And then another way I like to answer that question is that we strive to maximize diversity. We've already talked about the different types of artists and practices that are part of the program. We are also going to different places, as you'll see in this presentation. We use a living classroom philosophy. So we're sometimes in an urban space, sometimes in a rural space, sometimes in an academic classroom, sometimes in a city hall. We also encourage our faculty to use a lot of different teaching styles. So sometimes it'll be a very intellectual, classic academic model. Other times it might be an experiential exercise using performance art techniques. That leads right into modalities that we use as a learner. You all know how it enlivens things and kind of keeps you on your toes when sometimes you're working with your hands, sometimes you're doing person-to-person small group work, other times you're reading and discussing in a large group. We do a lot of switching it up in terms of learning modes. By nature, we're cross-disciplinary. That is maximization of diversity. And also our experimental approach keeps things lively. On our website, you can see an example of our curriculum, every single class that's taught in this program. I want to encourage you to visit our website and click on these classes because when you click on them, you can get a description of what each of the courses is about. I thought it would be useful for you to see what these course titles mean in terms of how it breaks down for each residency we've had so far. You may not realize we are in our first year. We're a brand new program. And so in this first year, in the summer, last summer, we did a natural building workshop with Colin McMullen for our Techno Lab class. That was learning how to build with cob. We made a cob oven. And you saw an example of that as you were waiting for the presentation to begin. We also learned timber frame building techniques. So this is building with wood that you're using hand tools to sculpt the wood. And then we built a pavilion over the cob oven at a community garden in Hartford. So that was the first manifestation of Techno Lab. The second one was this past October when we were in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and we worked with Sandy Spieler, who's the founder of Heart of the Beast Puppet Theater, and she does civic ceremony presentations through these giant puppets with her theater company that have really transformed the cultural landscape of the Twin Cities. Every May Day, there's a huge public parade. Hundreds of people show up to make these puppets together and then mark the arrival of spring. So she did a class for Techno Lab about civic ceremony. In the spring, we will be in Oakland, California, working with the artist Allison Smith, who has a textile and social practice, and she'll be working with us on utilitarian textiles that we will then be using in our program from there on out. The Art in Place class, Art in Place Reconsidered, for the summer was taught by Ernesto Pujol, and it was a workshop in performativity and how you need to know your own motivations, life history, and way of approaching art before you can bring your artwork into the public. In the fall, Art in Place Reconsidered focused on water and community, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. In the spring, we're going to be looking at art and dissent in the Oakland, California area for Art in Place. And our Distinguished Practitioner class, in the fall, we worked with Public Art St. Paul, and in the spring, we'll be working with designer John Bielenberg, who has a social design practice. So now what I'd like to do is share with you what we've done in this last residency. And I want to let everyone know that for our summer residency, we focused on that in our last webinar, which is on our website. So you can see a similar walkthrough of what we did. If you go to our website and look for the Rabbit Report, you'll see it there. So the first class I want to tell you about is this Art in Place Reconsidered. And we worked with 4 artist projects. One was Mona Smith's Vedote Memory Map, and that included activist and educator Ramona Kiko Stately and Lisa Farmer, as well as Mona Smith. We worked with the Water Bar, which is a project by Colin Klecker and Shania Madison. And we worked with Jude Jones, and I'll be showing you some pictures of our bike tour with him and the community work he's done in his neighborhood in St. Paul. And also we worked with Chris Baumler, who has a really interesting, somewhat vexing project she's figuring out that we gave our thoughts about. So let's take a look at what we did. On the first day that we arrived in Minneapolis, St. Paul, actually we arrived on a Saturday. This was Sunday morning, our first full day. We did the Vedote Memory Tour, and this is a tour of Dakota sites. So it was an incredible opportunity to go to various sites within the Twin Cities that are, in some cases, sites that are in this case, we're at Wakantipi, and this is the cosmological center of the Dakota universe. And we heard about how women traditionally would go there into this cave and give birth, all of the ways that the river, which this is right next to, echo the Milky Way. And it was so fascinating to hear about the cultural stories and traditions of this place. And we also learned about the difficult parts of Dakota history in the Twin Cities. Here we are at Fort Snelling, which was used as a concentration camp in 1862, the winter of 1862-1863. 1,600 Dakota were kept here after a forced march. Many of them died, and then after this they were put on boats and brought out to the reservation, newly established reservation. So these are difficult stories to share. We had incredible conversations and developed friendship and trust with our guides that led to us meeting together 4 more times, including having a traditional Dakota feast at Ramona Quito Stately's house. And you see Ramona here in the red jacket. The second person from the left is Mona Smith, and then Lisa Farmer, the first person in from the right. So at times it was really serious, at other times it was very joyful as we were thinking about how we are moving through history, we are learning so that we can benefit from the stories that happened and how we can then go forward as artists and leaders and not recreate the kind of cultural trauma we were learning about. The second artist project we dealt with was Chris Baumler's Bruce Vento Nature Preserve Interpretive Center brainstorming project. Christine Baumler has been asked to consider ways that there might be an interpretation center at the Bruce Vento Nature Preserve, which happens to be the location of Wacom Teepee, the center of the Dakota universe in terms of the cosmology. So this raises so many interesting questions, and we just helped her do a preliminary brainstorming session and used design thinking techniques and had a really productive generation of ideas, producing questions, thinking about how one could proceed in a way that doesn't reproduce colonial history's worst attributes. Another day, we met with Jude Jones, who's an incredible public artist. He is very engaged with this neighborhood of Rondo in St. Paul, and our mode that day was to hop on bikes and ride through the city. We provided transportation for those who biking is not really their thing, but we managed to all stay together and go through so many amazing sites where we learned about art projects, we learned about aspects of the community, the church, the history of redlining, all kinds of aspects of this predominantly African-American community in St. Paul. And our tour included the Western Sculpture Park, which is a project of Public Art St. Paul, which I'll tell you more about in a moment. And we really lucked out with the weather. It was a gorgeous fall day. Another artist project that was part of Art in Place Reconsidered is the Water Bar. And you may be familiar with the Water Bar. It's a bar that has bartenders that educate you on different municipal water systems, and you get a flight of water samples from different municipal water systems. So early that morning, we went out, we tasted the water, we heard about the different sources of these water samples, and then we went to a municipal water treatment plant and got to see how the Mississippi River turns into drinking water and think through the infrastructure there being led by these two artists, Colin Klecker, who you see here, as well as Shania Madison. The artist project we did on the Thursday of that week was talking with Mona Smith, and Mona Smith designed the Bedote Memory Tour that I showed you pictures of a minute ago. She has created a website that uses traditional Dakota sense of space and mapping ways, and she uses video to capture oral history and provide a platform that educators and cultural leaders can use. Keep in mind that the information we learned on the Bedote Memory Tour, all of that is a sort of information that average citizens in the Twin Cities don't really know. And so Mona's project is to raise awareness about this Dakota history within the Twin Cities. And here we are on the left at Public Art St. Paul. We used their space in addition to the class we had there for artist talks like this one. And she's talking about what it's like to create this kind of engaged artwork. The last day of that class, students presented drawings that they had made. They had been tasked with doing a map that addressed an aspect of the class that had touched them deeply. And so you can see the artwork took many different forms to give you a little more of a sense of the range of projects We have on the left here a water tasting wheel by Rory Sparks, who you'll meet in a moment. She's one of our current students who will be joining us. And then on the right and below is a scroll by Benjamin Howe. And he took local pigments of his earth samples and did a scroll that reflects his Chinese heritage as well as the sites that we visited. Techno Lab is another class we had in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and this is the one that was taught by Sandy Spieler of In the Heart of the Beast Puppet Company. This class was a performance, an opportunity where students were asked to devise a performance about the water, the Mississippi. So they were reading and discussing about water issues, but then translating it into these artworks. And on the right, you see an artist whose project was to gather us around. He placed a dot of water on our wrist, and we sat silently as the water both evaporated into the air and was absorbed into our body. So thinking about our internal body of water and the external waters all around us. Another project that was presented as we did the final day and walked through a ceremonial river walk with each artist's performance was this one, where we gathered some Artemisia into a bundle. The artist who collaborated on this made a little book about the different names of that plant and its different herbal uses. And then we released the bundles that would then go out to the ocean, all the way down the Mississippi River to the dead zone of the ocean. So you can see a range of solutions to that challenge of making a project that was a public ceremony, and collaborating with each other was part of the task. So the Distinguished Practitioner class sometimes will be working with a single artist, like in Oakland with John Bielenberg. This time we were working with an art organization called Public Art St. Paul. And they are a nonprofit that does multiple layers of public art programming within St. Paul, including a city artist program where artists are embedded into the municipal government. And our students had the job of working together to make a case study using the business writing format of the case study, and their focus was on the city artist program. So they had many different experiences as part of this class, but the case study was the work output. Here, and in the last slide, they were learning about a project that Aaron Dysart, who you can see in the light green shirt on the left, is involved in as he's trying to work out a public art project for a street corner in St. Paul. And so the students visited the site and worked in small groups to present proposals that allowed Aaron to get more input on the project he's just starting to conceive. I think you can get a sense now of how we contribute to the sites we visit. Part of this class was also visiting the stakeholders within the city of St. Paul who work with these city artists, and what is it like for them to have artists doing public projects that they are part of and that they can try to have some input on as they address different problems. So, for example, city artist Amanda Lovely, who's one of the thesis advisors for this program, has done a pop-up meeting truck, which you can see examples of on the Public Art St. Paul website. And that's in response to the city workers. You can see here what their workplace is like. They sometimes feel very isolated from the city people that they serve. And so this popsicle truck goes around and gets feedback on different issues that the city wants feedback on in exchange for a popsicle. We also did 2 science projects that we contributed to. This is Urban Flower Field, which is an Amanda Lovely project. And in it, she has taken an empty pocket of the city and created this beautiful sunflower field with a mural behind it. And the scientists you see on the left here are grad students from the University of St. Thomas. We helped harvest the biomass and weigh it with them as part of their research. And then the next day, we worked with Chad here, the arborist, who's a faculty member at the University of Minnesota, and we learned about aspects of tree pruning at another artist project, which is called the Friendship Forest. And that's where Amanda Lovely is building a forest, planting these trees along the river. And we planted some of the trees. We learned about the science of pruning. We learned about the experiments that Chad is doing here. And so again, you see those different modalities of learning. Sometimes it's conversations around planting trees. The last class that we had during the fall residency was the critique exchange, which was taught with Christy Gast. And she used the format of the artist interview as a way that students got feedback on each other's work. Before the residency, they interviewed one other cohort member, one other student, and so they were prepared with lots of information about that other person's work. They then took that information and presented it to the class as the student listened to the presentation and the feedback, which was a really great way to get feedback on your work because you're not having to explain it. You can really take in how your words and how the understanding of that get presented to the group. And then the outcome of the class, one of the outcomes, was to produce a publishable artist interview after having done extensive readings in this form of artist interviews, which is a really interesting genre of writing within art and art history and contemporary practice. So here's your pop quiz. You can see that when we think of Nomad 9 classrooms, we're thinking about all these different spaces. You know, all of the above here. Our classrooms can include City Hall, the center of the universe, a redline neighborhood, a public art nonprofit, a river, a water treatment plant, scientific sites. And that's one of the things that makes it so incredible to be part of this and makes me feel like I have the best job in the world to be able to put together such a dynamic and such a relevant program. For you potential first-year students, here's a lineup of places where you would go. As you can see, we don't have every single site down. I'm still doing site visits. I select the sites really carefully. But for this incoming class, this summer would start in Hartford and Rhinebeck, New York. You can learn about what happens in Rhinebeck and Hartford during the first summer in our previous webinar. We'll be outside of the U.S. in a southern location in the fall. And then in Miami, in the spring, we expect to be in Miami for 2 weeks. In the second year, we'll revisit Minneapolis-St. Paul, again being in Hartford in the summer, but this time also a week in New York City. And then we'll be announcing that 2018 February location at a later date. You can see the pattern here. We're always in Hartford in the summer, and then the fall and the spring are off-site locations. Moving on to some of the nitty-gritty here, the application process. First off, our due date for applications, for priority applications, is January 15th. What I mean by priority applications is that you will be considered for scholarships if you apply by January 15th. Our admissions continues until our cohort is full. The applications will be uploaded in SlideRoom, and you'll also fill out a University of Hartford grad application through the university website. All of this can be found through our website, which is nomad9mfa.org. In your application materials, we want to see your best work as an artist, and we also want to see evidence of your critical engagement and how you relate to the world around you and the critical context of your work in contemporary practice. We're also really interested in what you intend to explore when you're part of the program. The timeline for the application process is that after you submit your application by January 15th, we'll be scheduling some interviews in February of selected applicants, and then you'll be notified of your status in early March. And that's the same time where we'll announce scholarships. Deposits are due on April 15th, and waiting list decisions will be made by mid to late April. As you have questions, we want to introduce you to Carla Corcoran, who's seen on my left here. She's the tremendous manager for this program. She keeps everything moving smoothly. Another one of my amazing colleagues here is Summer Amorosino, who's with me in the room today. She's the grad admission director for the University of Hartford. And our slide got a little weird here, but I want to show you that for curriculum questions, and if you're considering the program and you're trying to discern whether the program's a fit for you, that would be a question that would come to me. Any application questions in terms of slide room issues and so forth could go to Carla. And Summer is really great at answering those tuition, financial aid, international student questions, but basically you could start with any one of us and we would get you the information you need by perhaps referring you on to another person. So here's our email addresses and we welcome your questions as you go through this. I'm showing you a picture of our current cohort who are all really curious to meet the new group of students. So we want to encourage you to apply if this program looks like it is a good fit for where you want to go as an artist. And speaking of our current cohort, I want to introduce Rory Sparks, who is going to tell you a little bit about a project she's done since she started in this program. Rory, if you can undo, there you go, the mic. Hi, Rory. I'm so glad you're with us. Rory is joining us from Portland, Oregon. She is an artist with a background in printmaking and bookbinding. She teaches in other MFA programs through her bookbinding expertise. And why don't you just talk us through your practice a little bit? And I have a few slides here of this diagram and then the photos from the Lover's Lake.
Yeah, absolutely. In my daily practice, I, as Carol mentioned, I'm a bookbinder and letterpress printer, and I run a collective membership-based studio called M-Space here in Portland, where other beginning, emerging printers and binders can have access to space and equipment for their launching their careers, and then also just for their general art practice. This project that Carol is showing slides of was one of my first projects in the program. She mentioned our time with Colin McMullen, who is the woodworker that we did the timber framing with and worked with, and we felled a tree with him, which was an amazing experience. But he also brought an ancient pole lathe that he made a model of. So it's a type of tool that was used to turn wood, and the action spring was made with a sapling, as you can see in the picture. So that spurred an idea for me for a tool for communication. It was called the pole lathe for lovers. So it was a tool to be used by two people to communicate and create objects of desire. And there it is in action in its first use. I installed it at a public bar, actually, which is an art bar. It's sort of a social practice project that two Portlanders have put together, and they have artists in residence there. So I was able to try it out with several different couples one evening, and we had an amazing time. So there it is being used by two lovers. And then Nancy and Adam, the bar owners, are on the left. And there's the treadle. There were all sorts of really sweet moments watching people communicate without words and helping each other strap into the treadle and make these pieces.
Thank you. This is so great.
You're welcome.
To see the images. Could you start just by telling why you chose this program? There are so many MFA programs out there.
Yeah, this was actually the first time I even considered graduate school when I heard about this program. I really enjoy the challenging academia and how it takes a completely different approach. The open outcome was very important to me because I wanted to be able to explore my own way and not be necessarily forced into something that didn't feel right for me. So that was a really important aspect to me. And then also site as teacher was really exciting to me. being able to travel and go to artists as opposed to hoping that they might want to move to my town to teach in my town. So that was a really intriguing and exciting part of the program to me, and so far has been actually the most amazing part for me in this adventure.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Why don't we move to questions that Carla has been gathering from participants? And Carla, as you say the questions, why don't you direct them to either Rory or I, depending on who you feel will answer them most, who they're directed to.
Absolutely. So the first one actually, Sophie asked while you were giving a nice little overview of the different classes, and she asked about do the teachers and subjects from the residencies change each year, or would you be working with the same artist over and over? And then I think you answered it a little bit later in that we will be going back to Minnesota in their second year, but if you want to just clarify that a little bit, I think that would help.
Thank you. So some of the faculty are with the program no matter where we are. So Ernesto Pujol, he works with us in the summer, and he will be a second-year thesis advisor. And regardless of where we do our residencies, he's part of the program. Other faculty members are specific to the site because, like we've been talking about, we really use the low residency format as a way to interact with people who are really connected with local communities, because we think that's like the best way to learn about being a cultural leader is to see people in their environment and see what they're doing and how they do it. So in this case, Sandy Spieler, we are probably not going to bring her out to Hartford to talk to us about Heart of the Beast. Instead, we go and we see her process and learn from her in the Twin Cities. So if you look at our website, this can also be addressed, I think, a bit by noticing which artists are listed as faculty versus visiting artists. Often the visiting artists are artists that we're meeting up with along the way at these residency sites.
That's great, thank you. We also had another question, and actually, Rory, you might be a good person to answer this one. How students can personally develop their own artistic medium while engaging in this multidisciplinary program. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure, absolutely. As I mentioned, it's an open outcome program, so we've been encouraged to not only work outside of our comfort zones to explore, but also to engage with what we know and to co-teach as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to be bringing your current knowledge into this amazing collection of people and this collective knowledge as well. And I've been trying to sort of step away from my comfort zones, and I think making a pole lathe is much different than print and book art, and was really exciting to me. But it does incorporate concepts that I think about all the time, and lets me explore really exciting new things that I wouldn't have otherwise felt comfortable doing. And so it's a really great opportunity to sort of push your boundaries and try new things, but also bring what you already know to the program and utilize that as well at the same time. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. That's great, Rory. I appreciate it.
I might add on to that a little bit by saying that if you think about it in terms of temporality, there are times where everyone's together and they're exchanging information, being encouraged to try new things in terms of the curriculum. And then there's other times when you're working at home and you're continuing your studio practice, you're touching base with the thesis advisor every 3 weeks and getting feedback from them along the way. So keep in mind that there is a thesis advisor that is dedicated to your work while you're progressing through the program. And even though it can seem like you're far away from everybody and it might seem odd compared to a residential program, there's a really intimate connection through Skype meetings where you're getting feedback on your work, and you have this every 3-week deadline where you want to show how much you've done, how your work's progressing, how you've implemented the ideas that your thesis advisor has given you.
That's great, thank you. We did have another question about some of the concrete skills that people will be learning through the Techno Lab series. I know you gave some good examples of things we've done, but not as much about what's going to be coming up towards the end, like when they get to Techno Lab 4. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
That's great. I'm glad to have an opportunity to do that because the Techno Lab series of classes, there's 4 different classes along the way, and that series is used to explore different ways of art making in relationship to places or history. As I think about technology, I'm always aware of how it's a spectrum from very simple things like a pole lace or like weaving on the one hand, and then on the other hand, it's technology as we think of it in terms of high-tech technology, like programming. Our last Techno Lab class, Techno Lab 4, is always going to be learning how to write code, learning programming. And so this series will be different subjects along the way. I think the best way to say it is that by the end of the series, you'll be better at working with your hands. You'll know more material techniques and more social techniques in terms of, like we saw with the civic ceremony techniques with Sandy Spieler, as well as these high-tech techniques. And by the end of the series of classes, you will really have expanded your knowledge of technology. I want to point out that most MFA programs do not do hands-on technical learning. And it's been a lot of fun for us to do this, but it's also just acknowledging that materiality, being in a physical body and making physical things, is an important part of many people's art practice. And I think in the digital era, it has a different meaning than it might have 20 or 30 years ago. So there's a lot of tangible and intangible things that you gain from the Techno Lab series. I don't know if you want to add on to that, Rory.
Yeah, the Techno Lab series is one of the most exciting parts of this program for me, being a craftsperson. So I'm really looking forward to the weaving aspect. I'm really looking forward to the challenge of the programming piece. But like you said, it's making and using your hands is a very important part of my daily practice. So this has been very engaging. And then also it engages all of your senses when you're learning. And I think that is another thing that with this program has been really important, you know, being outside and visiting various places and using our hands and using all of our senses as we learn. So.
That's great, thank you. Carol, can you talk more about the professional practices class? Because we've had a question about the more quote-unquote mundane side of art practice, like grant writing, applications, finding calls for artists, etc. Is that something that they learn in this program, or that is more something that they'd get outside of this MFA?
Yeah, I'm glad that question came up because one of my commitments with this program is that everyone who graduates will be really good as a writer, as someone who understands the day-to-day tasks of keeping an art career going, which involves often a lot of grant writing, a lot of pitching proposals, and sending ideas out there and just keeping the momentum going through some really grounded business skills. So our professional practices class is taught by Nico Whedon. She is a community art curator from the Studio Museum of Harlem in New York City. And it will have a focus particularly on public projects, which is an area of expertise for her. And when you look at that aspect of things, you not only get the sort of standard professional practices, which includes grant writing, understanding budgets, all of these like business skills, but you also get the part of it which is about how do we engage with communities as we're developing ideas? How do we understand the audience, whether that's a neighborhood association meeting where we might want to pitch a public art project, or whether that's a funder. And so by the end of the program, everyone will have as part of their writing samples grant that has been reviewed by faculty and that has been brought to a level that you can use this grant proposal to then go out there and apply for the actual opportunity, so that as you're graduating from the program, you'll be seamlessly entering your professional engagement as an artist with projects in hand that you're ready to pitch.
That's great, thank you. We've also had a question about the prerequisites to enter this program and be eligible for this program, and the performance expectations while they're in this program.
Those are great questions. So to be eligible for this master's degree, you need to have a bachelor's degree. And we specify a BFA, which will give you the kind of basic art understanding, not so basic, but as a foundational level of art understanding that the BFA provides. Once you get to the program, we have a configuration of our classes that ensures that you're always ready for the next class by taking the previous class. So you don't need to worry about any external prerequisites for any of our classes. Once you're admitted, we just kind of send you on this path of one class following the other. And you can get a sense of that on our website when you see what classes are taught in each residency. In terms of professional expectations, that's something that is on my mind right now, because I'm writing letters to each student, letting them know, where compared to baseline they are. And many students are exceeding baseline expectations. Some were saying, you know what, it'd be great if you could focus more on certain skills to kind of get you to that graduate level of performance. And we take a lot of care with each student to give them a kind of personal feedback along the way and help them develop their skills. Our philosophy is that we meet each student where they are, and we take them as far as we can through our facilitation over the course of the degree.
That's great, thank you. Since this is a first-year program, we've had a question about the acceptance of this program in the professional marketplace. And I know, Carol, you've had some great interactions with faculty members and other colleagues that you've met along the way, talking about how they really respect what we're doing in evolving this program. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think I would start by mentioning a little bit what it took to get this program up and running. So it was a process of several years where I was in conversation with Mark Dion, Ernesto Pujol, Linda Weintraub, many of the artists who now teach in our program and who have called for a different type of MFA because they really respect the idea that we would be bringing a more relevant curriculum to the degree. And where that comes from is an artist like Mark Dion saying, most of what I do is never addressed in grad school. I collaborate, I work with, museums and cities and work with scientists, and all of these things are usually left out of a graduate degree. Then another way I would answer that question is to say that it's almost invariable that when I'm working with distinguished artists who are teaching in this program, they're saying to me, I wish I could take this program. This is amazing. And what you're doing is really incredible in terms of what it brings to a field that really needs a breath of fresh air. I think we're at a time when graduate education is being looked at very carefully because there's so many different ways you can learn. You can take a MOOC. You can learn in alternative collectives of artists who are getting together and creating informal schools. But I wanted to make sure that we also have options that are exciting and dynamic within accredited institutions. So from what I'm gathering on the ground, there's a tremendous amount of respect for a program such as this. And I think part of that is that there have been some really exceptional low residency programs that have been tried and tested over the years. So I think of the BARD program. When you go through that program, people know that that's a really high quality degree. And I think that we're building on a format that is not questioned anymore, a low residency format, and the caliber of faculty in this program and the caliber of art that will come out of this program will also show that we're bona fide. So I hope that answered the question. I'm not sure if that got to the heart of it, but I think the last thing I'll say on it is anytime you try to do something new, you're a risk taker and you're a leader, and it's really exciting to be part of something that is new and is different. So most of our students take great pride in the fact that they're willing to take that risk. And Rory, I don't know if you want to add on to that at all.
I actually, since you are already unmuting your mic, Rory, we've had a question about somebody's curious about the average age of the group so far. Is it mostly people just out of school? And I know I can say just factually we have people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s in the first cohort. And so maybe, Rory, you could also talk about the experience of working with such a good age range and range of different mediums and expertises that people are coming into this group and learning from them.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate to have such a diverse group age-wise. It really brings lots of different perspectives, and I feel like I'm learning from my peers as much as my faculty and also teaching, and that's a really dynamic part of this whole adventure. And I came into this knowing that it was experimental and it was the first year, and that there were going to be unexpected challenges and exciting new things, and I was really excited to help be a part of that and to help build that and to give feedback and to be a part of this grand experiment, and it's working out beautifully so far for me anyhow, and it's really exciting, and I'm enjoying it.
Great. I think we've covered a lot of questions, and if we have another last burning question, we could do that. Otherwise, I think we've had an opportunity to really cover a lot of ground here. So I'm getting the signal from Carla that we have answered the questions that have come forward. I want to invite you to continue to submit questions via email to me. I'm happy to have phone conversations or Skype meetings as people are considering this program. And before we close, I want to say a great big thank you to Rory for joining us today. Thank you, Rory.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And for each of you who are joining us on the webinar, thank you for making time. I realize how busy everybody is in general, and especially this time of year. So thank you for joining us. I've enjoyed our dialogue, and I wish you a happy Friday. Have a great weekend, and let's stay in touch. Bye-bye.